And so today we're going to follow Gautama, the Buddha to be, from the going forth, which we covered yesterday, to the period just before he sits under the Bodhi tree to gain awakening. So it's quite a lot of material to cover in a way, and it's a very, very rich area, and it's for me it's my kind of area of personal interest. So I'm a little bit almost obsessed with this part of Gautama's life. So there's probably going to be it's how can I put this politely? It's going to be a rich morning, put it that way. Hopefully it's not too much, but anyway. So let's begin. So Gautama has given away his princely robes. He's cut off his hair. He's said goodbye to his loyal groom and horse, and he's wandered into the forest. And he's joined this community, or this loose band of wandering spiritual seekers who are roaming the countryside at that time, meditating, debating, arguing, practicing different yogas of different sorts. And he joins up with a meditation teacher, and he learns the art of meditation, and he soon masters some of the higher states of meditation, the dhyanas, and he becomes so proficient at what he's doing that his teacher says, become the sort of joint leader of this band of meditators. But Gautama has the realization that, helpful though these teachings are, helpful though these blissful meditative states that he's experiencing are, they're still not enough. They're still not really answering this deep, gnawing kind of existential question in his being about the cessation of suffering. And he bids farewell to this meditation teacher, and he finds another teacher who's said to be more accomplished, and he learns even higher states of consciousness through that teacher. But still, it's not enough. Still, blissful that though these states are, again, it's even a higher, more refined state of bliss. It still doesn't. When he comes down out of those states of bliss, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, is still there. And yet again, he leaves that meditation teacher and he goes off and he joins up with 5 others to practice physical austerities. There was a whole tradition at the time of people practicing very extreme physical austerities. These might include never going into shelter, so standing in the sun and the rain, whatever the weather, not moving, not washing, not wearing clothes, holding one's breath, eating very little, fasting. And he did this with such intensity that he began to develop a reputation of being the most accomplished, as it were, ascetic. They say his reputation resounded like a great bell around the area. Everyone knew of Gautama and the extremes to which he could go. And he would do things like hold his breath for a great length of time, and then he'd experience a great rushing wind in his head. He became so weak from doing this that he could, at times, could barely stand. He frequently would collapse. His hair began to fall out. His skin lost its kind of luster and shine. In fact, he became so emaciated that some people mistook him for a ghost. He was mistaken for a ghost or a corpse in the jungle. They say he was so thin that he could feel his spine through his stomach that felt like a great knotted vine. And at one point he collapses. And some say he had the experience of thinking of a lute and the way a lute, if the strings are too tight, you don't get a good note, and if the strings are too loose, you don't get a good note. And he realised that his strings were certainly too tight at this moment in time. And some say this is the beginning of the middle way. Others say that he was washing in the river and he was so weak that he collapsed and could barely make it to the shore. And his mother appeared, his deceased mother appeared and implored him to give up these practices, telling him that they would kill him and they weren't the route to awakening. Others say he had a memory in this weakened, feverish state, and he remembered being a young boy sitting in the shade of a rose apple tree, watching his father ceremonially plough a field. It's said that at the end of the monsoon season, the king would cut the first furrows with the plough before the planting began. And they say the young boy was left alone sitting under this rose apple tree, and his attendants had wandered off to join him with the festivities. And it was a beautiful afternoon, and he naturally got into a very absorbed state, what some would later call possibly an experience of dhyana. He just spontaneously got into a very absorbed meditative state. And this memory came very strongly to Gautama. And a thought arose in his mind that perhaps this was the way to awakening. And the thought also arose in his mind as, why am I afraid of such pleasure? Why was he afraid of this very natural, peaceful, at ease state that he'd experienced as a child? And he realised that this, as was illustrated in the image of the lute strings, that there must be a middle way between sensual indulgence and self-mortification through the practice of austerities. And he decided to give up the practice of asceticism, and he decided to start eating again and to put on clothes. Putting on clothes involved taking a shroud from a dead body and wearing it as a robe. And he was moving through the jungle when he was seen by a young woman called Sujana, and she was making an offering to the shrine of a tree spirit. And she had a golden bowl of rice milk, of a specially purified bowl of ritual rice milk that was being offered in gratitude to the tree spirit. And she actually thought Gautama might be a tree spirit himself, and she offers him the bowl of rice milk, the golden bowl. And Gautama takes the rice milk and he begins to eat again, because he hadn't been eating. They say he'd been eating just 1 grain of rice a day. So he takes the rice milk. Now, to his fellow ascetics, this was a fairly extreme about turn, going from 1 grain of rice a day to a golden bowl of rice milk. And they rejected him. They thought he'd sold out, he'd given up, he'd gone soft. The figure they'd admired and respected, they were deeply, deeply disappointed in, and they rejected him and turned their back on him and moved away. Now, being a wandering ascetic who'd taken up vows of not owning possessions, he was now in the possession of a golden bowl, which he realised it was inappropriate for him to have. So he went to the river and he dropped the golden bowl into the waters. And he said to himself that if the bowl floated downstream, this wasn't the path to enlightenment. And if the bowl floated upstream, this was the path to enlightenment. And indeed, the bowl did flow upstream, went completely against the current, where it said it ended up in the realm of a Naga king, along with all the other golden bowls of all the other Buddhas who'd gone before. Now, restored to health miraculously by this 1 bowl of rice milk, Gautama decides to set off to find a pleasant spot to meditate under a tree, where he will gain awakening, even if it kills him, even if it takes everything he's got. He vows to go and gain awakening. So we'll leave Gautama striding towards the Bodhi tree. So this is the section of the story we'll look at this morning, and actually all day really. So to me, this is a very, very pivotal moment in the narrative, and there's a lot of, I think, very, very significant truths revealed in the story. So yeah, there's quite a lot to say. So briefly, so he goes and learns to meditate with these 2 teachers, and he experiences the dhyanas, and his mind becomes very supple and subtle and malleable. And this, of course, is very, very important. It's very important. But it's interesting that he can also see how these kind of the very positive experiences of meditation are important and they're useful, but they're not an end in themselves. I mean, in the modern parlance, you could say Gautama was becoming a bit of a bliss bunny, as it's known in the trade. A bliss bunny. It could become quite addictive, these states. They can become, and it's very easy, they can be very seductive to get seduced by big experiences. If you're not having a big experience, you're not practicing properly. But certainly my own experience, I think big experiences need to be treated with a degree of caution. My computer. Big experiences need to be treated with a degree of caution. And it's an interesting contrast that he goes from these very blissful experiences to the very extreme experiences of the austerities. And I find it interesting that there's also this repetition of the motif of going forth, that in a sense, Gautama goes forth for a second and third time. He goes forth from these two teachers. He's still stepping into the unknown. He's still searching. He's not settling for what he's got. There's this courage to step away. And then he takes up these ascetic practices, which obviously to us today can seem very, very extreme indeed. But it's worth putting these practices in some sort of context, in that there was a whole kind of belief system, a whole worldview based around these, particularly promoted by the Jain tradition, that essentially that the body there was a kind of inherent suffering with having a body, and you're inherently just by eating you're generating a negative karma, because obviously by eating your food, even if you're the strictest vegan, there's suffering inherent in growing food. Insects die, and there's a little detail in the rose apple tree experience where some say that he has this experience of great compassion when he sees the plough turning the soil over, and he sees the insects being kind of brought to the surface, and the birds flock down and eat them, and he has a real, very strong, compassionate response to that. So that being a human being, having a body, from this worldview, it just generates negative karma. So practices like not eating become a way of not accruing more negative karma. And some Jain practitioners would actually literally starve themselves to death. Fairly extreme. But there's also this sort of view that the body somehow is the enemy, that we need to sort of liberate the Atman, the self, the sort of soul, the spirit, from the kind of prison of the body. And by inflicting suffering on the body, you're sort of freeing the spirit. You're severing your attachment to the body. And this is such an extreme reaction, I think, to all the sensual pleasures of his youth. It's the complete other end of the spectrum. There's a kind of profound psychic splitting going on here between what you could say mind and body. And from a modern perspective, I think in the modern day and age, if you saw someone behaving as Gautama was, you'd probably think they were profoundly mentally ill. There are these extraordinary rupas of this period where Gautama's represented almost kind of corpse-like. They're very, very extreme. I was thinking they're about as far from this sort of slightly cuddly garden centre image of the Buddha that you could possibly imagine. This sort of image of sort of joyful serenity and peace. These incredibly kind of emaciated figures. And there's such a well, the term self-harm came to me when reflecting on this. It almost feels like self-harm. And there's in one of the texts, he says, "I punished and tormented my body. It was like a strong man who grabs a very feeble person by the neck and torments him." I mean, gosh, isn't that sense of self-punishment? It almost strikes me as self-hatred. some people argue that this was just a very sort of logical way of experiencing different states of being, because of course fasting, for example, can create a very kind of light, lucid way of being. But this, and there's a sort of certain high that comes. I'm no scientist, but is it endomorphines? I think they get released when the body's under extreme stress, and there can be like the high runners get, and marathon runners and things. There is a certain sort of pleasure in inverted commas from putting the body under a great deal of stress. But there's this sense of really fighting with the body, fighting with almost punishing the body. This almost trying to break out of the prison of the body, to live in this sort of state of disembodied freedom. And you can see this is reflected in a lot of addictions. This sense of sort of wanting to be free of limitation, wanting to be sort of high, wanting to be sort of an out of body experience. Ecstasy, ecstasis, to be beside oneself, to be out of the body. That's where these phrases come from. And it's interesting that they're in our culture now. They're in our culture today. And you think of eating disorders and anorexia, this sense of, or self-harm, tragically self-harm. But fortunately, for Gautama, there's this sense of he goes to his lowest ebb. He goes to this sense of place of complete vulnerability, and it's as is the case sometimes. It's a breakdown, and it's also a breakthrough. He takes the will as far as it will go, basically, and as William Blake said, the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, which is a dangerous teaching. But for some people works, but for some people ends in tragedy, really. And I find it interesting, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, that the way these motifs repeat, and the motif of rebirth, that in some of the narratives this sort of turnaround, this change happens when he's collapsed in the river, he's in water, and the mother appears, and in some of the accounts he pulls himself out of the river on a branch, and it's such a repeat of the imagery of his birth. His mother holding onto a branch to be reborn, the climbing out of the river. I don't think I mentioned it, but in some of the early, so probably actually I say early, but early parts of his life, but in later accounts, there's this divine washing of water just after the birth. The gods send a stream of water to wash him after his birth. So there's this almost sense of sort of baptism or redemption. It's a very familiar motive in films. The big turning point in a film, they will often be standing in the rain. It's really interesting. Look out for it. The redemptive moment in a film will often experience the protagonist standing in a downpour. There'll be some sort of deluge. There'll be some sort of redemptive kind of washing away of the past, of a change. So Gautama kind of is almost reborn out of the water, out of this experience of mother. And he has that extraordinary memory of childhood. And this, I think, is incredibly significant and is often overlooked in the Buddhist tradition. So there he is as a child. Got him here on the shrine, his younger self, sitting under the rose apple tree with poor Gautama, the older self, naked and collapsed. And this beautiful, beautiful image of him sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father plough. So he's in a very pleasant situation in nature. He's watching his father. There are attendants nearby. So there's a sense of security, a sense of protection, a sense of what we've mentioned a couple of times on this retreat, of positive holding, of being emotionally held, of being protected. And in that sort of, it feels in that protected state, he's able to spontaneously enter this vulnerable way of being, this openness. And the imaginal realm is often said to be quite closer to the worldview of a child, that sort of beginner's mind of Zen, that sense of sort of openness. And as often as we grow older, we, Seamus Heaney says, we get hurt and we grow hard. I think something along those lines. We get hurt and we get hard. And the layers of protection build up. But there's the openness of the child. But it's a timeless state. In some accounts, they say the shade of the tree doesn't move for the whole afternoon. He's in this absorbed state for quite a long period of time. And the shade, as the sun moves, the shade of the tree remains, again, this kind of protection, this kind of canopy of protection over the young Gautama. And but it also suggests a sense of being out of time, that this experience is out of time, this reverie, that Gautama's stepped out of time. And there's a huge amount I could say about the nature of time. I've given a whole talk on the rose apple tree incident. I'll see if I can, if my technological skills are up to it, I'll see if I can make it available. But I think it's a really rich area because, very briefly, time isn't what we think it is. Time is very subjective. Time is very fluid. I don't believe time is linear. And I think these experiences are like almost like fractals. They repeat within themselves and they reappear. And time is very fluid and very flexible. And T.S. Eliot is brilliant on this, particularly in the four quartets. In fact, in the four quartets, to quote a little section from Little Gidding, he says, "At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard in the stillness between the two waves of the sea." And he goes on to, I might read more of it later, but it's a very, very beautiful description of timelessness. We all know that experience, don't we? When we're younger, time, those summer holidays that went on forever. And as we get older, time seems to get quicker. And we have retreat time. When you're on retreat, that it seems to go very quickly and very slowly all at the same time. So we could get a sense of the subjectivity of time. But it also points to the fact that awakening, I think this really is really important, that awakening is also out of time. And awakening is always present. It's present in our experience, in the here and now. The sort of immanence teachings, the teachings of Tathagata, of Buddha nature, point to this, that awakening is always available to us, even right now, in this instant. It's quite a thought, isn't it? And there's this image of, as I said, about the the insects and that this experience of timelessness is also, there's a sense of compassion that comes out of that through the experience of seeing the suffering of the insects being eaten by the birds. That wisdom and compassion are always joined. There's no wisdom without compassion. There's no compassion without wisdom. But this response, I find this absolutely fascinating. This response, why am I afraid of such pleasure? Why am I afraid of such pleasure? Mark Epstein's written a very, very good book on this episode called Going on Being, which is very, very good. Why am I afraid of such pleasure? He's just had this experience of sort of effortless kind of ease and sense of being in the world and ease with the world. And his response is, why am I afraid of such pleasure? And I wonder, because I've certainly, for myself, I wonder if it's profoundly threatening to our sense of identity. It's profoundly threatening to our ego. If we build a sense of self, a sense of separate self is built on this idea of, essentially, I think a sense of self is it's me against the world. You know, if you've got an individual self, an individual fixed self, it's you against the world, and you will heroically triumph against the world. We can all list off our achievements. We can say what we've done. And that's how we value people. It's how we value people in this society, isn't it? We value what they've achieved, what they've done, how many awards they've got, how much money they've got, how many dharma talks they've given, how many, whatever. We're always getting our calculators out, aren't we, to work out someone's value. But this experience of the rose apple tree, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't achieved anything. He's not made anything happen. It's just spontaneously arisen. And from the ego's point of view, I think it's just been made unemployed, hasn't it? It's just been handed its P45, as we do in Britain. And there's also this this experience that it's incredibly ordinary. It's a young boy sitting under a tree watching someone plough. There's no truths written in fire across the sky. There's no big experience. There's no big experience. And in Zen, the awakened mind they call ordinary mind. And similarly in self-liberation through seeing with naked awareness, the Tibetan Terma text says similar things, really, that the awakened mind is ordinary mind. It's available here and now. It's in that lovely Zen expression, it's nothing special. It's nothing special, because again, the ego wants everything to be special. We want to be special. We want to be special in a special world. But this is profoundly ordinary. It's like those Zen masters who just laugh when they get awakened, because it's just, they can't believe that it's there. It's the jewel in the dung heap. It's the jewel in the hem of our robe, as is used in the Mahayana. This image that we're all walking around with jewels. We think we're poor and we've got jewels sewn into the hem of our robes, and it's there all along and we haven't realised it. And it's the middle way. It's the realisation of the middle way beyond craving and aversion. I think it's very interesting that this whole experience, in a sense, is a mirroring of the enlightenment experience, of the awakening experience. He's sitting under a tree. He's having this, he gets into meditative absorption. You could even go as far as to say he remembers a past life, as in his younger self. And then there's the kickback, the reaction as you get, in a sense, as we'll explore tomorrow, as Gautama moves towards awakening. There's the attack of Mara, and this sort of sowing the seeds of doubt. That I find this, why am I afraid of such pleasure? This rising of fear happens. Because I think that's one of the things that it's inherent, I think, in any experience of insight or awakening or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, that fear will be there. I think Sangharakshita actually said that once, that it was quite a good benchmark to know whether you're having a spiritual experience or not. Is there some degree of fear? Because from the ego's point of view, it's pretty cataclysmic. So the ego will be profoundly threatened in these experiences. And I think a big part of practice is managing that fear with kindness and compassion, of bringing that fear along in a way, not rejecting it. Because this heroic model, this willful model of the asceticism of I will overcome the body through sheer determination, through sheer gritted teeth, of that imagery of being like a strong man subduing a weaker man. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And Gautama realizes that. And he's got the courage to do a U-turn, to change course, to go forth from this reputation of asceticism. He's gone forth again. He's had the courage to go forth. There's that old thing about madness being the definition of madness about repeatedly doing the same thing with the expectation that there'll be a different result. But he's having the courage to try something different, to try something new, to give up this fixed sense of self. I'm a great ascetic. I've got a reputation. It reminds me of that poem of Charles Bukowski's Bluebird in My Heart, where he talks about the bluebird sort of unsettling him. He says something about you're going to mess up the works. You're going to blow my book sales in Europe. He's having this experience. I'll put it on the Padlet. It's a great poem. And then you've got this beautiful imagery of Sujana arriving with the rice milk. Now I have to say, probably a bowl of rice milk is probably not the greatest way to break a fast, I have to say. And you'll definitely know you're in mythic time, fairy tale time, when one bowl of rice milk restores Gautama to health. In some of the versions, he literally takes the rice milk, next day gains awakening under the Bodhi tree. In other versions, it's a bit more, there's more time involved. But again, you've got this sort of flexible view of time. Now, for those of you who were in the afternoon session yesterday, we started to touch on this with Udika's point. In that, now I'm going to use the term masculine and feminine here, and I'm aware for some people this is really problematic, because there's a sense of you get unfortunately into issues around gender inequality and everything else. So some people prefer to use terms like lunar and solar, Vajra and Padma, but we're talking about a sense of receptivity, a sense of sort of nurturing and receptivity. But you could say, and apologies if you do find it difficult, but I think it is helpful if it's held quite lightly. that you've got this very strong, you've got the return of the mother, and you've got the return of, and you've got this appearance of Sujana with a bowl of milk. Milk, of course, being very strongly associated with mother. And it's interesting that the fellow ascetics accuse Gautama of being a childish man for eating again. He's a childish man for eating again. But he takes this willful, driven, sort of heroic model is that you could describe, if it works for you, as being very masculine, hasn't worked. It's completely out of balance. You can think of it as yin and yang if that works for you. So this other energy comes in. Something softer, something more nurturing, something more caring, something more less willful comes in. And that's what he needs. He doesn't need more drive, more effort, more gritted teeth. It's not working. And this also, he puts clothes on again and he starts to eat. And there's my friend Attila thinks this is, in a sense, the reintegration of the court, of the palace that he's left behind. That he's gone, as I said yesterday, he's gone from the palace, from society, from order and structure, into the wilds of the forest. And the wearing of clothes, the golden bowl, the prepared food, suggest a kind of a turning back towards, in some way, society. So there's an integration happening, I think, in this experience. Whichever way you see it, whichever metaphors work for you, I think you could say there's an integration of energies going on here. He's become less one-sided, less extreme. I mean, it's worth also noting that, of course, that the lifestyle that Gautama takes up is still, by our modern standards, very, very, very simple. He's still living under a tree, dressed in a shroud taken from a corpse. It's still very, very ascetic lifestyle, but it hasn't got the quality of self-punishment that it had before. You could say it's a sense of honest pleasures, just as he realises that sitting under a tree on a summer's day isn't to be feared. The kind of honest pleasures of life aren't to be feared. It's the craving and aversion that can arise in response to those honest pleasures that are the issue, in a way. And there's this beautiful imagery with this golden bowl. So he's got this golden bowl, and that he now doesn't quite know what to do with. Sometimes like one of those Christmas presents you don't know what to do with. And he takes it to the river, and he offers it to the river, and it flows upstream. It goes against the stream. Again, this imagery of the stream and the river just keeps reappearing, and this image of flowing with the stream. But I find it interesting, there's this sense that the bowl flows upstream. It goes against the stream. There's a sense that in some way there is a turning. I mean, we talk about a turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness, don't we? There's a sense that in some way the search, the journey to awakening does go against the stream. There's the craving and aversion, the path of craving and aversion can feel quite natural in inverted commas. And and in a sense, not reacting to craving and aversion can feel a bit unnatural in some ways from a certain perspective. So I wonder about this bowl going against the stream, and there's this lovely imagery, isn't there, of the bowl flowing upstream where it drops into the Naga King's realm, and there's this, and in some accounts there's this big pile of golden bowls from all the previous Buddhas, which I think is a really lovely image, and because you've got again this sense of that there's a pattern to awakening. There's an archetypal pattern to awakening that you can see in anyone who gains awakening. That's not to literalize it. You will literally have a memory of yourself. I don't think many of us probably saw our fathers ploughing. Maybe one or two of you did, but as a child. But there will be a sense of, I don't know, of this sense of opening up, of receptivity, of almost childlike wonder at the world, being childlike rather than childish. That sense of beginner's mind, sense of receptivity, of openness, that is also, it's important to say, tempted with discipline and structure and a certain form. That again, there's this sense of the holy life being a whole life. It's about, someone once said, life asks of us for wholeness rather than perfection, which I find really helpful actually. It's looking for a sense of wholeness. As somebody else once said to me, be big, not good. Be big, not good. So we have Gautama now having dramatically changed course, giving up his reputation. His friends his fellow ascetics have given up on him, have mocked him, and again he's showing great bravery, showing great sort of courage in not staying with a group that no longer serves him. Just as he's left the palace as a group that no longer serves him, he's left two groups of meditation teachers and their disciples that no longer serve him, and he's moved away. And in one sense, there's a betrayal. I'm sure his friends feel very betrayed by him, and in a sense, there's another necessary betrayal. There's a certain necessary betrayal for him to walk away. And yet again, he's facing his adult aloneness as he walks ever deeper into the forest towards the Bodhi tree. And I also think it's interesting that he's reached that point where he's got nothing to lose. The rose apple tree experience arises out of he's reached his lowest ebb, hasn't he? He's reached his absolute lowest ebb, and he's got nothing to lose. And I find it interesting now that he's heading off towards awakening, that he's got nothing to lose, got absolutely nothing to lose anymore. And there's a certain freedom that comes with that. There's a certain sort of lightness of being, possibly the lightness of being he was looking for in all that fasting. There's a certain sort of lightness that comes when you've got nothing to lose. So here's so we'll leave it there, and we'll look at the awakening tomorrow. So here's some reflections for you if you find them helpful. What is my story, and how much of it am I willing to let go of? What is my story, and how much of it I'm willing to let go of? Do I give myself the basic physical and emotional self-care to practice? Do I give myself the basic physical and emotional self-care to practice? And what would this self-care involve? What would that self-care involve? Probably related to that, what conditions for you give rise to a sense of contentment, of being at ease in the world? What conditions give rise to a sense of contentment? And you might wonder whether there have been rose apple tree moments in your life. Perhaps a memory of being a child, perhaps a spontaneous experience of real joy and ease, perhaps an experience being on retreat, perhaps anywhere, anytime. What are the rose apple moments in your own life? I'm sure you've had them. I'm sure you've had them. And also, can I get some sense of the path to awakening, or even awakening itself, being available to me right now in my experience? Do you get a sense of awakening being available, like those jewels in the hem? That awakening is available right now. And finally, do you really believe that awakening is possible for yourself? Do you really believe awakening is possible for yourself? Certainly for myself, who do you think you are that you can get away, you can get awakened? Do I deserve to become awakened? Do I deserve it? Even that notion of deserving it, it's a pretty dodgy idea, isn't it? So there's some reflections for you. I'm aware there's a lot in there. But I'll just finish by reading that slightly longer extract from Little Gidding from the Four Quartets, which, as I say, is fantastic in this area. And then we'll have a tea break. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning, at the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always. A condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. When the tongues of flame are enfolded in the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one.